Two new transfer portal commitments, and Ivey and Deion Branch back on the Louisville Cardinals staff for next year. We're going to talk about all that and more on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Joined today by my good friend and co-founder and current editor of the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast and CardinalSportsZone.com. Jeremy, how's it going?
What's going on, man? You sound a little rough today. We gonna get through this?
Yeah, my sinuses have been acting up, which they do. When the weather gets really cold every year. So I'm going to.
I like the deeper voice, man. It makes you sound like you're finally hitting puberty.
Well, that it's close to my announcing voice. So, but regardless, I'll make it through. A lot to talk about on today's episode of the show. Two new transfer portal commitments on Monday. Two defensive backs, Devin, Neal, and Myles Slusher. We'll also talk about Ivey and Deion Branch. It being announced on Tuesday that both of those coaches will be back for next year. And then we'll do a little bit of a different segment and talk about what are some realistic expectations for Jeff Brohm in year one of his tenure here at Louisville. Jeremy's starting out two new additions from the portal, which if you have been following Louisville recruiting, the Cardinals basically just got two other additions on the defensive line. Now two safeties, two defensive backs, I should say. Devin, Neal Jr. from Baylor, Myles Slusher from Arkansas. Of the six commitments that Jeff Brohm has currently gotten, now granted, you need to realize that this is recorded on Tuesday evening. The six commitments that he has gotten thus far have all been on the defensive side of the football. Is that coincidence to you, or is this kind of a pointing the finger to Jeff Brohm maybe not necessarily being fond of the lack of depth in the defensive room?
I mean, I think it can be a little bit of both. I mean, there's no secret that we've had a couple guys graduate, a couple guys leave, and Jeff did exactly what we wanted him to do, and that was to reload on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it can be a little bit of both, and I think he's done a wonderful job so far. Of course, tomorrow morning, as this airs this morning, signing day, letters are going to come early and they're going to come quick, and we're going to have a lot of them because we're going to. It's the greatest day, one of the greatest days of the year. You're going to have commit flips. You're going to have You're going to get somebody out of the blue that you weren't even thinking about. It's the best day. I can still remember back when we got Lorenzo Malden when we were doing National Signing Day coverage for CSZ, and I'm like, who the heck is Lorenzo Malden? Why is he committing to Louisville? And thank God we got him. What a great out of the blue pickup. But that's just part of the and normally those type of surprises don't hit until the February signing day.
Right.
But now with the early NIL and the early signing day, you're going to have just as much excitement. So, yes, I think he was addressing the needs on the defensive side of the ball. But I also think, he's known for offense. So, what's the best flex you can have? Oh, you come in and you get you get some grad transfers that can play on the defense side of the ball, and it just shows that you mean business.
More specifically for these defensive backs, obviously he added two defensive linemen, Stephen Herron and Rodney McGraw. We talked about that in the most recent episode, so check that out. But Devin Neal, more of a safety, I would assume probably will be in the mix of competing for the two deep because, you have MJ Griffin, you have Josh Meekins Jr., so on and so forth. Myles Slusher is the one that I'm really excited about. I asked a friend of mine that is around the Arkansas football program, and essentially he told me that it was a big loss for Arkansas. One of the bright spots on a secondary that wasn't all that great last season, and definitely was going to be a guy that would play right away for the Cardinals. Now, granted, a lot of times when players transfer out of a program, it is kind of an instinctive thing to do for those fans to kind of bash that player or kind of downplay the loss. Like, oh, we'll be fine. This isn't going to matter that much. We have a replacement. It seems like there's two schools of thought for Arkansas. Number one, this is a big loss. And number two, of all places to go, the Louisville Cardinals are the place to go here. I mean, Jeremy, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that this is a possible all ACC level addition to the Cardinals defense, to a secondary that needed some help.
No, absolutely. I think that's spot on because we're talking about a position that for the first half of the year we were we had a guy that wasn't playing up to his all ACC level, and then we had a guy that was getting burnt all the time, but he was giving his full heart and soul and his full effort. And anytime you can plug somebody in, Slusher, he's an Arkansas kid.
He is.
Anytime you can plug in a potential preseason all ACC All American like that, or all ACC first team, or whatever you want to call it, it's huge. And I think that this kid, like, as excited as we were to get Brownlee as in exchange for Greedy Vance last year, which I think we would have rather kept Greedy, but as excited as we were to get Brownlee last year, I'm 10 times more excited to get Slusher.
I think this is one of those defensive transfers that you look at. I'm trying to think of the players that Louisville's brought in defensively that have been extremely solid from the transfer portal over the past 10 years or so. Help me out on that. I know Devontae Fields was an instant impact guy.
Oh, Devontae Fields, Josh Harvey Clemens
started
Shaq
right away.
Wiggins.
Shaq Wiggins.
There's more. We for like 4 seasons straight, we were like last chance.
Momo Sanogo. That's another one.
There you go.
But needless to say, I think he's a player that when you look back after next season, that there's a good chance that if he stays healthy, that you look at it and think, okay, this is a player that you took from the transfer portal and plugged in right away, and you saw an extremely solid addition. And for a guy that plays corner in the slot against fast receivers, that is something that we're going to look at and be very grateful for. The other guy, Devin Neal Jr. from Baylor, a rotational guy for the Bears over the past couple seasons. But the interesting thing to me, we talk about Jeff Brohm really, really improving the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky recruiting-wise. A lot of people didn't know it. Devin Neal is from Lexington, from Frederick Douglass High School. So Frederick Douglass has been a place that has been very, very good to the University of Kentucky. Dane Key, for example, if you're following their team now. For Brohm to continue this local, and really it's not even local as much as it is statewide. I mean, Sadiq Clemens from Henderson County. Getting players from all across the city and the state, both from the regular recruiting in high school and also the transfer portal. I didn't know that we would be getting this many local guys right off the bat.
No, and even with Herring coming back home, there's rumblings of Milton Wright up at, I think he's at Purdue, trying to figure things out to get back here. Like, none of these kids wanted to leave the city.
I agree.
That's one thing that, and again, I'm not going to be one of these people that just completely destroys Coach Satterfield, because I truly believe he did think he was doing the best he could do. But he just, even with our contacts that we had on the staff, it took everything in my body to convince them that they needed to take Selah Brown. Like, there was a point in time when Sat doesn't think he's that impressive. I tried to get them to take Ricky Barber Jr. twice. Both times.
And now look at what he's doing.
He becomes an all-conference player. Like, where did he go first? I know he ended up at South Florida. So he goes to South Florida. No, not South Florida. Central Florida. No, oh, Western. He played at Western.
He started out at Western, then he transferred to Central Florida this past year.
He was all conference at Western.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, hey, can you put me in touch with Coach? I get him to Court. Court takes him to Scott. Scott's like, no, I'm good. And then he goes to Central Florida, and it's the same situation when he announces. Oh, sorry, the first time was when he was from high school. The second time it was Court both times I talked to, and the second time it was like, well, he doesn't think Ricky's big enough. Then he dominated the conference that Central Florida, the AAs or what, I don't care. He dominated two different conferences. Set didn't look at him twice. Set did not want to take Selah. I told them, if you do not take this young man, first off, he's going to be great at the next level. Right. Secondly, if you don't take him because of your personal reasons, you are going to get ran out of town. I'm not taking full credit for him being a Louisville Cardinal, but I do believe after speaking with Coach Dennison at the time that my feedback was well listened to. So he just refused. He let so many kids go to that school down the road.
But recruiting in general for the Cardinals. On Tuesday, got a little positive news. Ivey Deion Branch back on the staff for next year. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Gosh, this is difficult. And get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Moving right on along into the second segment with Cardinal Sports Zone co-founder and editor Jeremy Wahman. Jeremy, Ivey Deion Branch back on the staff. I feel like a lot of people thought that it was kind of up in the air for Deion Branch. We hadn't heard no, but we hadn't heard yes. Ivey, a lot of people after that performance on Saturday in the Wasabi Fenway Bowl were publicly advocating for the Cardinals to bring Ivey back in whatever role you can. Put him at defensive coordinator, put him at defensive line coach, linebacker coach, you name it, you have to have him on the staff. There were rumblings that if he were to leave, so would some other big-time players on that Cardinal defense, which does seem to be like that would have been the case. But regardless, it was announced on Tuesday, shockingly, that Ivey is back. Jeremy, talk about why this is so huge for the Cardinals moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll give your voice a little bit of a rest because I got a lot to say on both people. Ivey.
Take the floor. Take us into the third segment.
that situation is unlike any situation I've ever seen before. I was told straight up that none of Sat's coaching staff was going to be retained, and almost instantly for the days leading into the bowl and the days after the bowl, you saw all the parents advocating for him to come back, the fans saying they got to come back, the players. I know for a fact 2 of our key players that were entertaining other offers because they thought that Ivey was not going to be retained, and he was. Ivey got so much publicity during the bowl game itself from him fighting with the players pregame or whatever you want to call that, all the way to Triple H, 14-time champion Triple H. I probably messed up on that. 15-time champion Triple H from the WWE retweeted something along the lines where ESPN was saying he looked just like Triple H, and he doesn't really at all. He looks more like Sheamus than Triple H if you watch wrestling. If you don't, then just disregard what I just said. But so much publicity. I'm not sure at that point that you can afford to cut somebody like that. And especially since this man, I don't know how much he had to do with the defensive game plan during the bowl game. Again, like we talked the last time, I didn't have any expectations of the bowl game. both teams are missing a bunch of players that opted out. Both coaches opted out to an extent before both teams got their new coaches. Nevertheless, I don't know how much he had to do on the defensive side of the ball, but just his motivation, the stuff he does pregame, his Cardinal party postgame. Like, I'm hyped every time I listen to that, and hearing Deion say in the postgame of the bowl game, this may be his last. Actually, I think he said one last time. Let's get this celebration going. So I think even he thought at that point that Ivey was gone, and I'm glad he's not. I think he is a positive motivator for these young men, and I'm glad to see that worked out with Deion. Deion's a close personal friend of mine. Just going into my conversation with him, and I don't do this on our show because y'all are like, flex. But I'll flex on your show, no problem. I sent him a text the morning of the bowl. I was like, man, I know it's cold, but good luck out there. He's like, I'm going to try to get this W for y'all. I congratulated him after the game, told him I was very, very proud. Glad to have you here. He said, yes, sir. I appreciate that, bro. Had a blast with these young men. I said, you coming back next year under your original position? And this is on Sunday. I saw how big of a difference you made during every game. And that's something I want to say before I finish the conversation. Deion is employed by the university, not by the football team. So it's one of those situations where they have created a position because they know how valuable he is to the program. So a lot of people are like, well, he did a good job for being an office employee and this and that. Make no mistake about it. Every time Malik got down, they panned to the sidelines. You could see Deion with his arm around him. Anytime any of the running backs fumbled, he had his arm around him. Anytime anything negative was going on, Deion was there to motivate him. But again, I asked, are you coming back this season? And he said, that's the plan. So I think he knew he was coming back at that point. I know that he didn't want to be a full-time head coach. So that's why he's still in this position. But I am over the moon happy for him. I know how much he enjoyed. Like, he'd never been a head coach before, and he was able to hop into that role under the most horrible conditions and pull out a W. I mean, we ran the ball down their throat and pulled out a W. So I'm very, very happy about both men being retained. Again, really, Deion didn't get retained because he's on the university payroll. But I like it. I know we've not heard a whole bunch about the new staff because Purdue still got a bowl game. So some of the guys that are going to come down here from Purdue that didn't want to announce anything because they didn't want to be a distraction are still yet to be here. So if you're a football nerd like me and like Dalton and like so many others I know, the next few weeks are going to be awesome. We're going to hear about new coaches being named, new players being named. We're going to get expectations, which I know we're going to talk about in the last segment. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a fun time. I mean, we just can't do people. I implore you. We cannot do like we did with Satterfield and like we've done with Coach Payne so far and get a coach and then just have insane expectations for them every year. Teams are going to slip up. They're going to lose games they're not supposed to lose. More so on the football side with that comment. Just got to have patience, got to have faith. We were very impatient, rightfully so, with Satterfield. I feel like we were just getting into our groove with him, and I would have been okay had he been our coach another season. But I'm glad things happened the way that they did. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, we kept the two guys. Honestly, if you'd have asked me last week, you can keep any two guys on the sideline for Louisville, I would have said I want Ivey and Branch. That's exactly who was kept.
You mentioned expectations. That is a perfect segue into the final segment.
No, I've done this before, Dalton.
There you go. We'll do that here in just a second. If you're listening to this on certain streaming services, you're not going to hear these audio implemented advertisements. If you're watching this, you definitely are not. So just be patient and stay tuned. But regardless, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's Take of the Day. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, or available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Sorry, I was used to the old read, but regardless, final segment with Cardinal Sports Zone co-founder and editor Jeremy Wahman. As you can tell, my voice getting worse and worse by the minute, so I do apologize for the the rough sound coming out of my vocal cords.
I like it. I get to talk more, so I hope your voice gets worse throughout the rest of the show.
It probably will. But quickly before we end the show, talking about expectations for year one under Jeff Brohm. As you mentioned, you can't get too insane. Sure, the expectations are going to be high for his tenure. There's a lot to be excited about. The schedule, I mean, I don't think it's as tough as it was this year. And the transfer portal allows you to essentially eliminate any type of rebuild, which I don't think Louisville's in a position to rebuild at all. Jeremy, realistic expectations for year one under Coach Brohm?
14-0. No, I'm just kidding. No,
okay.
I believe you're correct. You don't have with NIL and the transfer portal, you don't have to rebuild. You can reload, and I feel like so far that's what we've seen.
Right.
I think everybody just sets the win total at 8. I think that's especially with a first-time quarterback, which we still don't know. There's been some rumblings of who the experienced quarterback's going to be that comes in, and you don't have to be an electrician or a plumber to figure it out. You can do the research, but I have a feeling that Pierce is going to play a lot this year. So that's why I don't want to get. I say 8. I think 7 should probably be the win total. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Satterfield got us more than that. Well, you know what? This ain't Coach Satterfield. And at the end of the day, he still is going to have to implement his offense and his defensive philosophies. So you gotta take in consideration a learning curve. You've got to take in consideration the fact that we're sitting here on December the 20th and we still don't know who the grad transfer. Maybe somebody else will be playing in a bowl game. That makes me feel a lot better because he's led his team to success. But these things can change. That's why it's so hard. Not to get off on another tangent, but people like Dalton and myself that get information before a whole lot of other people, and we share it with our teammates. And then 2 days later, something else happens. That's because with NIL, that has made what we do a lot more difficult.
Things change so much more quickly.
For example, DeAndre Moore, just in the last 24 hours, has been, and this is not an exaggeration, has for sure been going to Louisville 6 times and for sure been going to Texas 6 times by people up there that know.
Yeah, I mean, and this is airing on signing day. Actually, it publishes at midnight on signing day. So there's a chance that if you listen to this in the morning, with DeAndre Moore being on the West Coast, you probably won't hear about it until after you listen to this show. So who knows what he's going to do. I think context-wise right now, there's no telling what DeAndre Moore will do. But regardless, before we get out of here, Jeremy, didn't mean to cut you short.
No, you're good.
Realistic floor, realistic ceiling for the team next year.
Okay,
realistic everything.
Realistic floor, I think 7 wins.
Okay. Realistic ceiling.
Realistic ceiling. Gosh, it's so difficult.
Don't you predict 15-0? Don't do it.
No, I think regular season. I think 10-2 is the ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I mean, I don't want to put the cart before the horse because you still have to play the games. And talking about this on December 21st, I mean, obviously things change. You still have to do what you have to do in the transfer portal, deliver on signing day, so on and so forth, keep healthy and stuff like that. But looking at the schedule, Kentucky and Notre Dame, probably the two hardest games next year. Outside of that, I think that all the games, as of right now, I believe are pretty winnable. So I think 10 wins is a good ceiling, regardless of how you slice it. 7 wins, I'd probably go 6-6 as the realistic floor, because 4, I'm thinking like the very worst. I think that 6-6 is probably the very worst we go. But regardless, the moral of the story here: don't let your expectations be driven by your excitement. Try
Right.
to look at this from a realistic standpoint. So, but Jeremy, I really appreciate you saving me on this episode. There's no way I could have gone 27 minutes or so of me talking alone. So, Jeremy, because
what
I'm
she
so
said.
appreciative of you, I'll give you one chance here to plug in your social media and give any parting thoughts.
Thank you for being so generous,
Oh,
Mr.
you're welcome.
Pence.
Anytime.
Yeah, you can follow me. Follow me on. Well, Dalton's already got the Twitter. That's my same as Instagram down there. It's at Jeremy_CSC. The website's at Card Sport Zone. We'll have great signing day coverage for you throughout the day today. So make sure you're locked on to those Twitters, and we'll give you a show. And then the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast, you can find that on all the podcast avenues. I like that better. That's the way it should be.
Here you go.
More natural.
Here you go.
You can find that on any of there's 125 in all podcast avenues: Google, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, all of them. No, I don't like that at all. I don't like that one at all. But yeah, you can follow us in any of those places. We're gonna have a special episode coming up soon. I've talked to our guy Earl Clark no less than 6 times in the last week, asking him when would be a good day. But the plan is to have 2 more episodes before the new year. One with Mike Rutherford from Card Chronicle and Earl Clark, all-time Louisville great. And the last one will just be a wrap. I like to give everybody a couple weeks off at the end of the year so they can relax with their families and no stress, no pressure. So just stay tuned for those.
And as always, thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. That's going to wrap up this, I guess, really signing day eve episode, because obviously this has no coverage of signing day. But the next episode, we'll talk about signing day and what all happened on Wednesday. So everyone have a great day. Relax and try to enjoy it. And we will see you right back here tomorrow.
Yeah.